Okay, this is a recording that's being placed on the website of the Politics UK textbook published by Routledge. My name is Bill Jones. I'm one of the authors, and I have great pleasure in doing a short interview with my local MP, Graham Stuart. Just a couple of words about him. Graham was educated at Cambridge, where he was active in conservative politics. He was also active in business, founded his own business in Cambridge, later became an MP in 2005 for Beverley and Holderness, which is the place where I live myself. That's why he's my MP. And at the moment, he's Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State at the Department of International Trade. So he's a junior minister with his foot on the second rung of the ladder, I would think, Graham, because he was briefly a whip and now he's in a departmental minister. Okay, enough of the introductions. First question, I wonder, Graham, if you can tell us how come you got sort of into politics? How did you catch the politics bug?
I think I was sent to boarding school in Scotland, where so you're there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, especially the Michaelmas term, which seemed to go on for eternity, which does make you a bit sensitive to anything you think is unjust or wrong. So I guess I was interested in the politics of the school, and then in my sixth form, I found that my favourite subject, English, was not very engaging the way it was taught. So I kind of switched off and just looked for other things to read, and ended up reading lots of samizdat literature from behind the Iron Curtain, behind various, literature smuggled out from various totalitarian regimes. And I suppose my favourite book at the time was A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Solzhenitsyn. Just a slim volume. Any of your students looking at this, it's a really easy way into Solzhenitsyn, and just focuses on one man's attempt at survival in the sort of minus 40 degrees of the Gulag Archipelago in Siberia, the network of camps set up by Stalin. And that led me onto the Gulag Archipelago itself, another book or series of books, volumes by Solzhenitsyn. As I say, it really was very dull, my English teaching. So if you can plow through various volumes of the Gulag Archipelago, the alternative's pretty grim. And from all that, I think from then I thought how fragile civilization was, how fragile is decent treatment of people, freedom, respect for the rule of law, justice, basically, and that it could all too easily be destroyed. And therefore, I think it was when I was at school, I thought I'd go into politics. And then I've had people since saying, well, why on earth would you go into politics? Why would you subject yourself to all that scrutiny and the rest of it? Well, I always thought, well, on the contrary, we all would like to matter. We'd all like to be important. We'd all like to feel we left something behind. And politics is an enormous privilege where you get to be engaged in issues local, for the individual, to the group, the area, nationally and internationally. So, if you can pay your bills and survive economically and be involved in shaping the most important issues facing your country and indeed humanity, then what a fantastic profession to be involved in. And bearing in mind all along that all the good things are fragile, and each generation has to fight for it anew.
Thanks very much. Yes, I suppose reading Solzhenitsyn and the rigors of living within a totalitarian system must have moved you a little bit away from any tendencies to be on the left-hand side of the political spectrum. Would that be right? You thought, well, this so-called left-wing experiment in the Soviet Union is producing exactly the opposite of what any political system should. And so this tended to recommend a more conservative right-wing outlook rather than, say, a socialist left-wing one.
Yeah, well, I guess because, at the heart of socialism, you're the expert far more than me, but it would be this sort of, what's the right expression, overvaluing the group, emphasis on the group rather than the individual. And so I suppose, yes, coming out of that, I came out with a fierce belief in the importance of the individual, and any system could be judged by how it treats the individual. not just the group, and that politics that's based on groups tends to, it's all too easy for it to slip into effectively inhumane and regressive policies. And I haven't particularly changed my view since that is a tendency of the left. So while they're always convinced. And one of the things I dislike about the left is they always wear this sort of cloak of moral superiority. They're so sure of their moral superiority. I have no such certainty. I have to wrestle on a daily basis trying to work out whether what I'm doing is right. I certainly don't think there's by me just being a conservative, I'm automatically right. In fact, it's one of the very few original aphorisms I've ever come up with is never trust anyone's motives, least of all your own. Try and sit above yourself and look at it as if you were another, to try and get some perspective, which will always be fleeting and hard to get hold of. But we don't need people who think that the group is all, and therefore you can pay a price to get to some group nirvana. Nor do we need people who are so possessed of their own moral righteousness that they start to confuse. They start to think that the end justifies the means, and they're always on the side of right. So I think conservatives tend to be a little more morally humble, which I think is probably a good thing in the exercise of power.
Yes, also ideologically pragmatic, I would think, in terms of the history of conservative ideology. I tend to agree with you, by the way, about that moral superiority. There's nothing more off-putting than somebody who thinks that you're sort of inferior to them, not such a good person as they are. But anyway, let me ask you a little bit about the nuts and bolts of being a politician. Yeah, obviously, you're a representative, not just of the people who voted for you. I think it was 2,500 majority in 2005, and at each election you've increased your majority. Wasn't it 15,000 at the last election in December 2019? So there's
I'm embarrassed to say it was 20,000, over 20,000.
Oh, sorry, it was 20,000. It was 15,000 in 2015 or 17. I must have got my figures wrong. There we are. That's a lesson to any student looking at this. Make sure you got your facts right. But it struck me that being an MP representing this vast body of voters, and also people like me who I'm sorry to say didn't actually vote for you, not to say that I don't think you're a stout representative of the constituency and the region, but is it how many sort of emails and letters and tweets or whatever do you think you get, say, in a day, or perhaps give me a sort of ballpark figure, for a day or a week or whatever?
Yeah, what numbers are we talking about? It will come to, normally I think around 2,000 plus a year. I think it's gone up quite a bit since the pandemic hit. I don't know whether it's because people have got more problems, so there'll be an element of that, and whether some people have more time on their hands. But it's a pretty constant interaction, though there's quite a lot of people cutting and pasting, or just writing dear fill in the name of your MP here.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And they contact me about Trident, animal welfare, a kind of whole list of issues which are almost become predictable. So there's the campaign emails, which is one thing, and then there's trying to sift through that. Not that people expressing their views isn't important, but trying to get, my main aim is to think of what I can do practically to help people. So I try to make sure that we focus on those with genuine casework need, and make sure that we provide them with a good service, because by the time they come to the MP, they're probably pretty despairing. They feel ignored by whoever it is they're engaging with, and therefore one of the things I've always prioritized is trying to get back quickly and substantively. So not send a holding message, but preferably they should contact me, and 2 days later they get a substantive reply. I want them, they will be astonished, because their life up to that point all too often has been one of endless frustration and no one answering a straightforward question. So trying to break that and then shake the tree on their behalf is one of the, it's really gratifying. And when I do my street surgeries, people come up and say, you've made a huge difference to my life. Which is nice to hear.
I've seen you doing. Yeah,
It's also important to make sure that we fix the system so they don't have to come to me in the first place, because otherwise it can get, what I identified as a counsellor as a sick dance, as I called it, where somebody should have their services sorted for them anyway. They come to me, I know exactly who to contact, it gets fixed. They then tell everyone I'm great, and we're all happy. The officer and the council, please, because I think they're great. The constituents, please. And in fact, a single mum with toddlers on a really busy road should have had a fence put up in our council house already. She shouldn't have had to come to me in the first place. So anyway, there's all sorts of interesting elements in trying to get that service right and fix the wider system so that they don't need to come to you in the first place, and they can carry on thinking that politicians are useless and of no real matter to them.
Yeah, it's interesting that a lot of people, surveys show that when you ask people, what do you think of MPs in Parliament, and they tend to say, useless lot, we should get rid of them all. And then you say, well, what about your local MP? Oh, he's okay, or she's okay. They tend to have a general sort of disdain, but a particular regard, which is, something, at least it's something anyway. All faith hasn't disappeared. But in a sense, you're like a sort of high-level social worker, legal advocate, CAB counsellor. You're all those things on behalf of your constituents.
Yes, and I have a team who work with me who probably trump me on empathy, efficacy, and a whole load of other things, and knowledge of the welfare system, etc. So it is a sort of team effort, and I'm always been fortunate. 16 years an MP, and I've had fantastic staff through that time. And so my job is to stand at the street surgery and take the praise and credit for things which my team have actually done. But trying to set the right standard, make sure that we move swiftly, and that we really try and focus on the nub of the issue and answer it, rather than just do something formulaic. I think that's at the heart of trying to do something, doing it well. And hopefully the people who deal with my office in need feel that they are dealt with well.
Okay, I'd like to ask you something about your ministerial role next, but before that, I'd just like to ask you this question, because it's always struck me, the thing that's personally always put me off being a public elected figure. A couple of times people have suggested I might stand or whatever for a council seat or whatever, and I think I'm not sort of sufficiently emotionally secure. I think you've got to have a really thick skin, to do your job and to enjoy your job, because you get quite a bit of flack, and of course we know that politicians have been much criticised, the expenses scandal and so forth, and just that general sense, oh, they're no good, they're in it for themselves. I mean, do you think you've got a thick skin like a rhinoceros, or what?
Well, we're all human beings, and everybody, there's a tendency to put you up on a pedestal just so you can knock you down. But I may have a thicker skin than many. I try to say, just like you should sit above yourself, you sit above the whole fray and look at it and go, well, it's not personal. I had someone who made death threats against me, which was bad, but then my family as well, which was worse and unforgivable. But actually, after the engagement, and they were sentenced, but they wrote me the most charming letter, and recognizing that. Anyway, I just give that's the worst end. Actually, I always think, again, having been an MP quite a long time, I always think my constituents are extraordinarily kind to me in general, probably far more than I deserve, and I don't get that much grief. You're always, you can be, one of my colleagues with a duck house in the expenses scandal, and no one was interested in the reality was that he hadn't done anything wrong. He wasn't trying to claim a duck house, lost in the technicalities. And then his wife, his family, 30 years of public contribution, and you're swept away. So that you are at risk of that. But then that's part and parcel of having a robust democracy, that there isn't, you're not granted total trust by the electorate. And if we were, that would, I think it would become scary. People would very easily confuse their own personal interest with the national interest, as you see in too many places. I think one of the joys about what do I like about this country? I would say one of the best things about it is the 22-year-old journalist. I'm scared of her, and she isn't scared of me. And I've been an MP for a long time and a minister for 5 years. And that's, it's kind of the heart of it. We are there. And if you don't want to do it, don't do it. If you're not thick-skinned enough, don't do it. But actually, it's a privilege to help shape, your community and your country. And but in a democracy, people can suddenly take that away. And so 1 minute you're riding high, you win the Hartlepool by-election, and you think you're God's gift, and there's some special formula we've got that uniquely unites the country behind us. And the next minute you've got Chesham and Amersham, just to remind us that the electorate refused to be taken for granted. And that's, I'm anticipating your question about the health of our democracy, I suppose.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Well, just before that, just let me dig a tiny bit into your ministerial activities, because to make it from the back benches into a ministerial seat is almost like sort of being a spectator on the terraces at a football match and then suddenly being invited onto the pitch, as a player. Did you find that transition a difficult one? And how do you rate your civil servants? There's been quite a bit of stuff, not least from a senior advisor to your Prime Minister, about the quality of civil servants. And what do you think about them?
Right. Interesting questions there. I didn't feel like I was a spectator. I was a member of Parliament. I was previously, I made the mistake having supported David Cameron for leader and upsetting David Davis, my neighbour. Then I thought it was my duty. All I'd ever been, I'd run my own business since I was at university. So I'd never really been a subordinate. I'd never learnt the art. And so I kept telling David Cameron where he was going wrong. Funnily enough, that doesn't go down very well. So I had to wait 11 years until he ceased to be leader of the Conservative Party before I was able to get any step up. But in the meantime, I felt, as a backbench MP, there's a tremendous amount you can do. I never understood my colleagues who got so despairing if they weren't a minister. The be-all and end-all of political life is not being a minister. I was able to do all sorts of things as a backbencher, campaign for community hospitals nationally, get the new hospital built in Beverley as a byproduct of that campaign to sort out the Humber Bridge. It was absurd that we had the highest tolls in the country and most of its capacity was unused and there are unemployed people at either end. So getting that sorted was great. I loved being a backbencher. And then I could, of course, do scrutiny. We changed the system so the whips didn't appoint you to be a select committee chairman. Previously they did. First election where it was done by a overall election of the whole House of Commons was 2010. So I stood to be chairman of the Education Select Committee. I would never have been appointed by David Cameron's whips, not a chance. But I went to see Ed Balls, who I'd been torturing on the committee for the 2 years previously, and in the Strangers Bar, and asked if he'd support me. He smiled wryly, looked at me, and he said, "Well, if you're half as much of a pain in the neck as you have been to me," he said, "you'll be just the kind of guy I want chairing the committee. So you've got my vote." So I then got elected as the Select Committee chairman. And then again felt that running a select committee, which we did with great intensity, we actually helped shape education policy under Michael Gove. And there were areas such as the GCSE system, which both he and David Laws, the Lib Dem coalition, other senior education minister, were opposed to. But they both came around and the committee won. I personally won, and we got the system changed, hopefully for the better. So there was all sorts you can do as a backbencher. I'm not obsessed with ministerial life, but I've loved the last I can't believe it's been 5 years I've been a minister now. First as a whip, as you say, and then as a trade minister for the last 3.5 years. First as the investment minister, encouraging investment into the UK, and then promoting exports out, but all trying to bring prosperity to every part of the country and get more businesses to see the opportunities for them in international markets. So it's great fun and it's a great privilege, and I've loved every minute of it.
Civil servants?
Oh, sorry, I didn't answer on civil servants.
Yeah.
I mean, they're varied like they are in everything. In general, I think they're pretty good. I'm proud of the civil servants I work with. I think they work phenomenally hard. My eldest daughter is now a civil servant, and in the Department for Health, as it happens. And I think the civil servants I've met, I mean, they varied. Some frustrate the hell out of you. Some are super technocratic. Others can be a bit away with the fairies. But in general, I think they're pretty committed and decent people. And it's like, what do they always say? There are no bad soldiers, don't there? There's just bad officers.
Yes, that's one way of looking at it. Okay, let's get on to that broader question of, I think you've really talked about your job and how much pleasure you get out of doing something that is a creative job that actually makes a difference. What about the health of democracy as a whole? It's been on a roller coaster, hasn't it, really, for about, the last 10 years? It seems to me there was the expenses scandal, then there was the Scottish referendum, then there was the the national, the EU referendum. Then we had two general elections, and it seemed like, everything was crazy for, 3 or 4 years towards the end of the last decade. I mean, do you think this is a good thing? Have we become more populist? Is this a good thing? Or do you think really we're just going through a phase, this is a blip, and that fundamentally the system's working?
Fundamentally, the system's working. Democracy's always been messy. Everyone always thinks there was some ordered past of reasonableness. I think it's, as long as, what we've got to cling to is that people do decide. And everyone, you get all these people too close to it, whittling on about safe seats and building alliances, which is great. Everyone's free to do whatever they like. But in truth, I think the electorate generally get what they want. They understand the system. They surprise you all the time. And they overcame a 25,000 majority in Cheshire and Amersham to send us a message there. And equally, in Hartlepool, they took a different view. So no, I tend always to think it's about, I tend not to want to mess that much with the structures. I tend to think the structures tend to be all right. It's those within it then need to live up to it and do the best they can. But I'm too reluctant for someone with a great architectural framework view of the Constitution like yourself. You probably have all sorts of things you want to change. I tend to think they won't make that much difference if the people and the culture and the attitudes don't change, and they don't tend to be linked that often to the systems. So no, I think our democracy is great, and people get what they want, and we continue to have a system which is fairly clean. The first past the post, I'm a big believer in. I know that offends all those in the political studies departments, but again, it's just an instrument to give effective government. And when people are sick of us and want rid of us, they can chuck us out, and that's it. They really can. So rather than having some list system where, because I've been around a while and I haven't blotted my copybook, suddenly I get re-elected no matter what you do. And the people of Beverley and Holderness have had enough of me. I'm out. Go and do something else, mate. Thanks very much. There's not much of a thanks, but hopefully somebody will say it on the way out. And that's it. I like the brutality of it, and the fact that people get to decide. And if they don't want you, they get rid of you. And that's at the heart of our democracy. And thank God we've got that. And we're not one of these totalitarian regimes that's going the other way. You've got China increasingly self-confident in its totalitarianism, its authoritarianism. And it's really important that we build closer ties with other democracies and those who are committed to a global order that's based on, rules, and it doesn't just descend to some Orwellian nightmare of conflicting blocks. We need a global system that works for everybody.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks ever so much, Graham. I think we'll call it a halt at this point. We've gone over the 10, 12, 15 minutes we suggested, but you've been very generous with your time and with your views, and I think you've given us a great insight into the life of being an MP. And I hope any students watching might think, well, it's not an impossible dream. It is possible for anybody with real intent and a bit of talent and a real drive, and also, of course, a very thick skin to get into Parliament and to stay there. Graham's been there 16 years. I dare say he looks forward to staying there for another couple of parliamentary sessions at the very least. So thanks ever so much for that, Graham, and bye for now.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.